All right, everyone. So up to this point, I have made plenty of videos where I talk about different lists of champions that are good in various aspects of the game, also based on their rarity. So you'll have, your rare champions that are good at the clan boss or the campaign. You'll have your epic champions that are good at this, your void champions good at that. I've done plenty of videos like this. Now, what I wanted to do today is mix it up and quite literally do the opposite. Instead of talking about lists of champions that are good in certain aspects of the game, I wanted to talk about what makes a champion bad. Now, this is going to be really important. Now, unfortunately, in Raid Shadow Legends, there are a ton of very, very bad champions. So this is just to show you guys as an example based off of a tier list that I really like and use a lot, which is a Yumi Love. I'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a second, but this is just some of the champions, and this is just in the rare category that are classified in the lowest tier right here. And you can see the list goes on. These aren't even all the champions here. You also have, the rank above it, which are still champions that are not really that great. These are still probably not champions you're going to want to invest to level 60 and 6-star. And that's just rares. Then you have your epics, of course, which same thing. You have just long lists of not so great champions. So it can be very difficult to memorize all the champions or kind of have in mind what all the bad champions are. Instead, it's important to actually understand what makes a champion bad versus what makes it good. Now, speaking of Ayumi Love, I will leave this link in the description because this is a fantastic resource, especially if you are just looking for the actual lists themselves, not only for bad champions, but also for good ones. And the reason why I mentioned Ayumi Love is because out of all the tier lists that I've looked at, and it's probably been at least 7 or 8 pretty comprehensive ones since I started the game, this is probably the one that I agree with the most. Now, there are still a few things that I would move around here and there, maybe up a tier, down a tier, but generally speaking, I would say this will give you a very good idea of where most champions kind of lie in terms of how good they are based on where they're placed on the actual list. So I will leave this link in the description, and I will also reference it a bit throughout this video, but let's get into what actually makes a champion bad versus what is going to make a champion good. So let's talk about number 1 on the list, and this is a very important one. Something you're definitely going to notice right when you look at a champion's skills is, are there too many conditionals in order to actually activate the skill? Now, this is a really easy one to tell. Just before you even start using the champion, you just look at the skill description, and if it looks like a mess, well, there's a pretty good chance that the champion is also probably a mess. I know that sounds crazy, but in a lot of cases, it's true. Not every case, of course, but if you kind of get that garbage mouth description reading through a champion's skill, there's just too much going on, not really going to be the best sign. So just as an example, you have your if this, then that. If this is, going on right now, either with the champion, if they have the right buffs, if they have the right HP, then you're going to activate that. But if not, then you're not going to get the effect. So there's too many conditionals requiring way too many things in order to go properly, just in order to really activate the skill. And if you don't meet those conditionals, then you aren't even going to get the full benefit of the skill. Now, there's a lot of champions in Raid Shadow Legends that have effects like this, and like I said, this is not a 100%, 0% situation where every conditional makes a champion bad. It's just a generalization. Most champions that have too many conditionals in their skills are going to be a lot lower in the tier list and not as usable as champions that are much more usable without having to have certain things really go your way. So, just as an example, I will show you here, if we go to the Dwarves category, let's see, and we go over to Hatchet Slinger right here. Now his first skill here, you'll see attacks one enemy 2 times, has an 80% chance of ignoring 15% of the target's defense if this champion has 50% HP or higher, has a 10% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn if this champion has less than 50% HP. And this is honestly a basic case. You have some skills that get even crazier than this, where you really have to have a lot of things happen in order to get the full effect of the skill. But you can see here, it's almost like 2 different skills. If the champion has more than 50% HP, you have a completely different skill than if the champion has less than 50% HP. And that just really changes the dynamic of the entire champion. It's very strange. It's very hard to build teams around too many skills like this, and it's definitely going to bump a lot of champions down on tier lists. So not always 100%. There are definitely champions out there that will still be good with conditionals, but if they have too many of them, or if they get too complicated, or if they're too difficult to manage, then it's not that good. So that's going to be the first thing on the list right there. Now moving on to number 2. This is a very important one, and I want to share with you guys a great champion that is an example for this, and that is the too many mismatched scalars for abilities. Now, if you don't know what I mean by that, that is what kind of stats do you need in order to get the full effect of an ability. You know, if you have a champion that is attack based, are their skills attack based? Do they have other parts of their skills that in order to really benefit from them the most, you need to not focus on attack, but you need to focus on either defense or HP? So the reason why this is bad is because you really want to be able to dump all of your best resources into a particular focus point for a champion. That way you can focus on that focus point, whether it's, you know, attack, defense, or HP, and all of the aspects of the champion are going to be benefiting at the same time by raising whatever that focus point is. So if you have an HP based champion, you want the damage to be HP based, you want any other skills and abilities, it has to also be HP based, because if they're not, then you have to kind of balance it out. And generally speaking, you know, when you have to learn to balance out the stats on your gear, you're not going to be able to get as high numbers, and it's generally going to make a champion weaker. So let's go over to the Banner Lords just so I can show you guys a great example of this right here. So if we go to Banner Lords and we go to Preserver. So Preserver is, as you can see in the skill description, a defense-based champion, but when you take a look at her actual skills, they say attack-based. And then you also have this ability right here, places a 7.5% continuous heal buff and a shield buff on this champion for 2 turns. The value of the shield is proportional to this champion's max HP. So you have a defense-based champion that it reads in the actual champion menu with skills that are actually based on attack, and then another skill where the shield is proportional to this champion's max HP. So you can see where it's just kind of a mess everywhere. You've got different points that you need to really focus on in order to get different abilities and effects out of the champion, and it's not really focusing in on one of those. Instead, you have to kind of work on all 3. So that's going to be a really big point that makes champions weaker and fall down the tier lists quite a bit. Alright, next up is if the skill effects are too low in order to activate. Now, this is something you are also going to find a general theme among lots of champions in those bottom tier lists, in the lower categories. So I want to bring up an example champion here in the Banner Lords. And actually, this is also one of the points that I thought I would mention where a Yumi Love brings this as I think a bottom tier champion in the lowest category. I believe the F tier for Bombardier. Yes, it is in fact in the F tier here. However, even though this is a champion that is a great example of this thing that I'm going to show you guys, I don't know if I would put it quite in the F tier. I would probably move it up at least 1 tier. So, you know, this tier list, it's great. It's a great generalization, but there are still some champions that I would move around a little bit, maybe up 1, down 1, and so on and so forth. But let's go over to Bombardier, who is going to be in the Banner Lords section. Alright, and this guy right here. Okay, so great example of this. You have his first skill. Attack to an enemy has a 5% chance of increasing the duration of all debuffs by 1 turn. Now, 5% is obviously a very, very low chance to activate. Now, of course, he's going to benefit by skill books tremendously because it increases the chance to 10 and 15%. And there's even a mastery as well, which you can actually use to bump it up all the way to 20%. But it still gives you a good example of generally how champions, if they have a too low percentage to activate their skill effects, you're really having to rely on RNG a lot more. It's not going to be as consistent. You're going to go through battles where you're not able to really activate their skills and get the full potential of the champion, and it's absolutely going to knock them down on tier lists quite a bit. Now, this guy is still a rare that has a debuff extend, which is a very powerful effect. He also has a poison, even though it's the weaker version. He's not great, but I don't think he's absolute as trash as most champions in the F tier list, so maybe I might bump him up 1 tier, but he's still absolutely not a phenomenal champion by any means. Alright, next up on the list is just a complete lack of a common purpose. Now, a lot of champions, if you actually go through and you take a look at all of, like, you know, the F tier champions, you're gonna just notice that the skills, they're all just kind of, they feel random, they don't really work very well together, they're just kind of all over the place, and you think to yourself after reading all the skills, you know, what does this champion even do? It's just got random skills on it, but what does it do? And I'll just show you guys an example here in the Ogren tribes. Let's go to, let's see here. Ogryn Tribes, and let's go to Fortress Goon right here. So if you take a look at his actual skills, you'll see attacks when enemy has a 15% chance of placing a 15% decreased speed debuff, okay? And then you have his second skill, attacks all enemies, has a 40% chance of placing a 50% heal reduction debuff. I mean, okay. And then his third skill right here, heals all allies but 10% of their max HP, places a 30% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns. You know, this champion really kind of is all over the place. You've got, you know, a weak decreased speed on his auto attack, which is based on defense and attack. You have a AoE that has a weak version of a heal reduction, but it's only a 40% chance. You could boost it up a little bit, but it's still not going to be the strong version of heal reduction. It's still not going to be a 100% chance. And then you have this weird heal that also places a weak version of increased defense. So you just kind of have a weak champion. I mean, pretty much every aspect of this champion is weak in its own way. You've got the weak speed debuff here. You've got the weak heal reduction with a, you know, relatively low chance to activate it. I mean, not super low, but it's not 100%. And then you just have this weak heal here with also a weak increased defense. So all over the place, just weak everything. Not a very well built champion, and definitely going to cause it to fall to the bottom of a lot of tier lists. Alright, next one is very, very important. And you're going to definitely notice this among a theme of a lot of champions also pretty low on a lot of tier lists, and that is too many single target buffs. However, I will say single target debuffs are okay. Single target buffs are a lot worse than single target debuffs, because think of it this way: you are always going to be fighting with your entire team, especially in endgame content. When you're doing the clan boss, when you're doing late game dungeons, you're always going to be using your full team, so you always want your full team to benefit from buffs. But when you're fighting enemies, you've got the clan boss, which is only one enemy. You've got, you know, the bosses in you know, the dungeons like Dragon and Ice Gold. Those are, you know, one target most of the time, not always, but single target debuffs are much not as bad as single target buffs. Single target buffs are definitely not great, and you don't want that many of them on your champions. Now, 1 or 2, it's totally fine depending on the actual champion itself, but if you find that a lot of your buffs are single target and not affecting your whole team, that's generally going to be a problem. So I want to go over to the Banner Lords and show you guys another champion as an example, and you can see that when we take a look at the skill, if we just change one thing about it, it actually turns into a pretty good skill, but unfortunately it is a single target. So it's a second ability right here, places a block debuffs buff and a 60% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns. Now, if it was an AoE and it affected your entire team, that's a complete game changer right there, because now you have a block debuffs, you have the strong version, which is 60% of increased defense, and you can even get it down to a 3-turn cooldown with skill books. But unfortunately, because it's single target, it's not really that great. And, you know, unless this champion has a lot of other really good stuff going for him, which, you know, he's got the strong version of decreased accuracy, I guess, but, you know, this skill is just not super great. You know, unless he's got other stuff going for him, this skill really needed to be an AoE for this champion to actually be somewhat reasonable. Now, I say that because there are still champions that do have single target skills that are good. And like a lot of the things that I'm talking about in this video, one of these things might not necessarily make or break a champion. I guess in this case, completely break a champion, because we're talking about bad things. But, you know, you really have to take a look at what the other aspects of a champion are. And just so I can show you guys a bit of a contrast here, you know, there is a champion that is considered very good that does have a single target ability right here, and that is going to be in the Barbarians, who is, let's see here, Warb Maiden. Here we go. So Warb Maiden does actually have a single target buff here. Attacks on enemy, places a 50% increased attack buff on this champion and an extra hit if it's critical. The extra hit cannot be critical. So you do have that single target increased attack, which is on my list of things generally you don't want on champions, but because she offers other really useful things to the table, she's still actually considered a pretty strong champion. So you look at our third skill here, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance, which is not low, you know, which is one of the things on my list. You can get it up to 100% just with skill books without even the mastery, of placing that 60%, which is the strong version of decreased defense for 2 turns. So that is a very, very strong ability right there, and that's going to compensate for the fact that, you know, maybe this increased attack was single target. She also has this poison on her auto attack, so, you know, even though she's got one thing about her that maybe isn't that great, the other things are going to make up for it, and she's still actually a reasonable champion. So thought I would mention that because it's important to know that just because you have one of these things on this list doesn't automatically make your champion F tier. You really have to consider all the other things and balance it out. Alright, so next up on the list, this is going to be the last thing here. Very, very important. Probably one of the most important things and probably one of the easiest things to actually tell at a first glance when taking a look at these skill descriptions, and that is if it has the weak version of skill effects. Now, for most skills, there's going to be a strong version and a weak version. So, you know, you have your increased defense, which I've shown in this video. The weak version is 30%, but then you have the strong version, which is going to be 60%. You have poison, very simple one, very important one for the clan boss. You have the weak version of poison, which is 2.5%, but then you have the strong version of poison, which is 5%. So, you know, just like before, having one weak buff debuff or, you know, a weak poison isn't automatically going to completely ruin a champion, but if you generally find that most aspects of a champion are weak with their buffs and debuffs and instead of strong, then that is absolutely going to bring a champion down on those tier lists quite a bit. So just as an example here, if we go to the barbarians, let's see, so barbarians, and we go to Ox, this guy right here, let's see, you have his second ability, attacks with enemy, has a 60% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Now, remember that single target debuffs are okay, they're not as bad as single target buffs, but because this is the weak version of decreased defense, you know, that's not necessarily that great, and you'd really have to take a look at the champion and see if they've got another super, super strong skill that kind of compensates for a relatively weak skill. And if they don't, if the rest of their skill kit is kind of meh, like this guy right here, kind of meh, then, you know, this is going to be the point that really does break that champion and move it down quite a bit in the tier list. So anyway, I think this video is long enough as it is. I'm sure there is other stuff that I could talk about. You guys can see why I couldn't really just fit every bad champion into a single video because there are so many of them, so it's much more important to really know what makes a champion bad rather than just listing off the names of the champions. But once again, if you guys do want to know the actual names of champions, this is the tier list that I probably recommend the most because it's generally going to be the one that I agree with the most choices of. Like I said, I could still move a couple things up or down, maybe one tier, but besides that, still gives you a very good idea of you know, where champions kind of lie in comparison to others. So I'll leave it in the description once again. It's Ayumi Love. Absolutely love it. I use this for plenty of my videos and definitely a big resource for Raid Shadow Legends. So with that all being said though, that is going to be it for the video. I hope that you guys enjoyed and it helped out. And if you guys did, you want more videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to help out, leaving a quick like means more than you can imagine, and more Raid Shadow Legends videos should be popping up on the screen right about now. Feel free to check them out, but if not, until next time, have a great day. This is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.